I just got back from walking to the marina in La Ceiba, Honduras, and I'm waiting at a four-way stop to cross the street. You know, standing there looking fly in my brand new Walmart tank top and prescription safety sunglasses. These guys pull up alongside me in a side-by-side ATV, you know, looking hard and looking my way. And I'm thinking, great, where's this gonna go? And I see the driver lean over and hit the radio, and this ear-piercing tuba and accordion music comes blasting out of the ATV. And there's something about tuba and accordion that just makes it impossible for me to feel intimidated. I just walked off. Welcome to this week's episode of the Sailing Capella podcast, where sometimes I talk about sailing, and the video backdrop could be, you know, virtually anything. Running, sailing, God only knows. I am going to tell the story of the storm this week. I forget sometimes that I didn't know then what I do know now. If I didn't beat myself up a little, I suppose I would just walk around with my hands in my pockets all the time. I'm going to tell this story in a way where I will occasionally insert what I think I could have done different or what I would do different knowing now what I didn't know then. My third morning out of Fort Walton Beach, I was sitting in the companionway, my absolute favorite place to sit on Capella, drinking coffee, just about ready to make my breakfast. And I look up at the jib, it's fluttering. Before I could trim it, the luff started to tear. I needed to get it furled up. Well, I looked forward at the forestay, and it completely right before my eye pulled out of the bowsprit. The roller furling mechanism bent in the middle. There's no way I can furl a bent roller furling. While I'm fiddle fucking around with that, the luff tears completely out of the sail. It just shreds. Within a minute, the whole thing became a mess. The forestay is what supports the mast from the front, so I'm completely terrified that I'm going to get dismasted. I harness up, clip in, run forward. I have an extra halyard. It's the spinnaker halyard, but I don't have a spinnaker sail. So I ran that forward, had to thread it through the shredded jib while the thing beat the shit out of me, tied it to the bowsprit, winched it down. It kind of in a tangle with the wreckage of the roller furling in a way where I was just hoping that it was providing support, but I wasn't certain that it was. I ran back to the cockpit, started the motor, and turned around so that the wind would be behind me. I didn't want anything pushing that mast aft because I figured it might just topple over and I'd end up with a boat with a hole in the cabin, no mast, just a mess. And I'm about maybe 120 nautical miles from Port St. Joe and about the same distance from St. Pete. What I could have done had I known better was possibly hove to and been able to, you know, keep the mast out of the wind, cut the jib down, analyze the damage. The forestay was broken. I couldn't do anything about that, but I might have been able to either better secure the mast or at least evaluate the situation and see if it was at all possible to proceed towards my destination instead of turning around. I started motoring back towards Port St. Joe, and at first things were going pretty smooth. I had already been without autopilot for days. The autopilot, which I had named Kevin, malfunctioned a few hours out of Fort Walton Beach, but I found that if I sailed close hauled, balanced out the sails just right, I could maintain a pretty good heading. Every now and then Capella would yaw back upwind and I'd have to correct, but the better I got at balancing the sails, the less likely the boat was to yaw, and I got pretty good at it. I actually preferred it over autopilot because it's completely silent. Kevin makes quite a bit of racket. While motoring, I figured this would be even easier because I was running bare poles. There's no sails, so the wind really didn't have anything to act on. And for a few hours, that was true. I managed to keep a heading without issue. The seas began to rise, and before I knew it, I was glued to the helm. The boat would keep a heading for a little bit since my course was about, I would say about 20 degrees off the direction of the waves where they were almost hitting me a beam. Every now and then a wave would cause Capella to yaw anywhere from 90 degrees to a complete 180 degrees off course, which meant I couldn't leave the helm. Even if Kevin had been working, he couldn't steer in these kind of seas very well. At least I don't think so. I wasn't too concerned at this point because the seas still weren't too bad. It was fairly sunny, it wasn't raining or anything, and I really didn't perceive how far I had to motor. Now, I've been having problems with the motor, Ziggy, for a little while, but I seem to have got it ironed out. I had a fairly full tank of fuel, crossed my fingers and hoped I could make it. The chart plotter estimated less than 24 hours and I'd be in Port St. Joe. Well, the chart plotter was wrong. Ziggy's little bubble trap that I made still had to be bled off every 4 hours, and it turned into a bit of a nightmare pretty quick. By sunset, the seas had rose to probably about 9 or 10 feet, and I'm trying not to tell a sailor story here. I ended up meeting somebody who was out there in a power cat. 9 to 10 feet is what what they said the seas were. But I'll tell you what, they looked like mountains to me. And they were starting to break, which was a bit scary. I had death grip on the helm. I didn't realize it until I tried to let go of the wheel and had to pry my fingers off of it with my other hand. I couldn't get to the head, I couldn't get to the refrigerator, I couldn't get to water or food or anything, because within about 30 seconds of letting go of the wheel, the boat would lose its heading. And once again, yaw 90 degrees off course, or even worse, move in a direction where the waves would hit me beam on, which is not a really good way to take seas in any boat. Here's a few definitions to help make some sense out of my story. There's no ropes on a boat, only lines. A halyard is a line used to raise and lower a sail. To yaw is to rotate on a vertical axis. To lay hove or heave to is to basically park the boat at sea. What I could have done here before everything completely went to shit, which, hang tight, it's about to, I could have lie hove to a sea anchor. And I thought I had a sea anchor on the boat. It turns out I didn't, but I did have things I could have made a sea anchor out of. Problem is, I lacked the knowledge that I could do it. I had not practiced doing it, and, well, I just didn't do it. So the shit hit the fan. The first thing to happen was the radio, which it's a new radio and it has a lot of features that I haven't really had a chance to play around with. It starts screaming at me for some reason, and I'm thinking it's the ship warning system telling me there's somebody nearby, which really wouldn't have been that bad. I could have used a hand. I look at the receiver and it says low battery. Here's the thing, the radio doesn't have a battery. It's running on ship power. That means I'm about to lose ship power, and that power runs the radio, charges the iPad that's my navigation, and the navigation lights, and the cabin lights, and the autopilot that doesn't work, but I was actually using the rudder position sensor to help me helm the boat. Before I could even finish this sentence, the power's out, everything's gone dark. I knew why. Without getting into it, the particulars, I needed to get into the engine compartment, which is a 2-foot by 3-foot hatch in the cockpit of the boat, and attach a battery cable to the engine charging system. I've been working on cars pretty much my whole life, and I can't even tell you how many times I've been leaned over the fender of a car, putting in a car battery, barehanded, holding a metal wrench with no insulation, not wearing gloves, and never had a problem. Well, I reach into the engine compartment holding a crescent wrench, or as the French call it, a croissant wrench, to hook this cable up to the battery, go to loosen the post nut on it, and get the absolute shit knocked out of me. I guess 12 volts is a little bit more dangerous when you're covered in saltwater spray, and the deck of the boat, and the battery, and the croissant wrench are covered in saltwater spray. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had to hook this cable up, so I'm just thinking, I'm just going to have to continue to get shocked as shit as I'm trying to unbolt this fucking thing. I ended up hooking the cable on the post, and that was that. I just figured maybe electromagnetism will stick it there. Shut the hatch of the engine compartment, because that hatch is just basically a giant hole in my cockpit waiting to get pooped by a wave and fill the entire bilge with water. Within 5 seconds, the cabin lights turned back on, then the radio, then the nav, and everything was fine. Everything wasn't fine. That was just the first thing to cause problems. Every single rechargeable thing that I had on the boat, including my cell phone, my Garmin InReach, and what I was afraid of potentially was my iPad, which was my primary source of navigation. If I ever unplugged it, when I plugged it back in, it lost the ability to charge. Now, luckily, I had one of those, inductive disc chargers for my iPhone, so I could still oh, no, I couldn't, because the charge block got some spray on it, malfunctioned, and it's a USB-C, blah, blah, blah. Point is, nothing was working except the motor, and that was the most important thing. So I kept on motoring towards Port St. Joe for what seemed like a fucking eternity, because it was an eternity. I motored for 30 hours. The seas kept getting bigger, and just to make myself feel better, I thought, well, at least when I get to the lee side of land, the lee side being the side where the wind isn't blowing, which is bullshit. This is just a story I told myself to try to keep myself calm, that the waves would die down, the wind would die down. I'm getting pelted with rain. Luckily was able to get below for just a minute, ditch my sopping wet sweatshirt, throw on a puffy and some foul weather gear. My legs were still wet, but it didn't matter. I didn't feel anything. The rain was blowing sideways, so I guess this qualifies as a storm. An unforecasted storm, by the way. As the ocean got shallower, the waves got taller and more frequent, which made it harder to steer. It got to the point where I had Ziggy pretty much maxed out within his comfort zone, which is about 2,700 RPM. I needed that much power just to hold course because the seas and the wind were pushing the remnants of my tattered jib all over the place. My biggest fear for the last entire time this whole thing is going on is that the motor's either going to quit or I'm going to run out of fuel. I figured I had enough fuel to go 24 hours. I just didn't know how much fuel this motor consumed, exactly how much fuel my boat holds, how long I could go. And Ziggy's been a bit of a jerk anyways. So then what do? The only thing keeping me from just letting the waves do whatever they want with the boat is the fact that I have this massive 27 horsepower 3-cylinder naturally aspired diesel putzing away like the African Queen, keeping me going in a straight line. And that was not some kind of a slur. The African Queen's an old Humphrey Bogart movie. Even though I would at that time consider the condition stable as long as the motor was running, I knew that if the motor stopped running or if I ran out of fuel, that my circumstance was going to deteriorate rapidly. I wasn't sure what to do about it. I tried raising Port St. Joe on the radio, both the marina and Seatow. I couldn't get to my phone. I got nothing. Oh, did I mention it was Christmas? Yeah, this is Christmas Day. Merry Christmas to me. I have a lot of ways to call for help. Well, I used to have more before my Garmin InReach died, but I still had an ePerb, which I believe you're only supposed to use that when you're sinking. And I also had the big red button, the distress call button on my radio. So I went ahead and pressed it because I didn't want the first thing I had to do was hit an ePerb, but felt like that would be like setting off an H-bomb on my boat. The cool thing about that is that it gets automatically repeated from any radio that can pick you up, even if that radio is not manned by a human. To skip over a bunch of the bullshit along the way, eventually the Coast Guard showed up overhead on a plane, and it might have been overkill, but I pay taxes, I've paid a lot of them over the years, and I think I just used every last cent of it. Christmas Day 2023. The plane overhead radioed down and asked what I needed for assistance. I made them aware of my situation. It was basically a pan call, not a mayday. They said it was perfectly acceptable that I called, and it was a good thing that I did. They monitored my situation, which stayed the same for a while. They did help me raise Seatow, who said that they would meet me in the harbor with fuel if I needed and provide a tow if possible if I lost motor. I wasn't so much afraid of getting beached or thrown upon the rock. I was more worried about getting capsized or knocked down. I just wasn't sure how you're supposed to handle that situation. Once I rounded Sandblast Key into the harbor at Port St. Joe, the seas finally calmed down. Even rounding Sandblast Key was difficult. The wind didn't change direction. I did, and it took every last bit of that boat to push itself around the bend. Once I was in the harbor, I wasn't really in danger anymore. There were still a little seas in there because it is a big harbor. The motor was still running. I had spoken to Seatow. I now had the ability to not so much leave the helm, but let go of it a little bit. I pulled into Point South or something like that marina in Port St. Joe and tied off. There wasn't anybody there, but inside the marina there was absolutely no wind, and I didn't have a hard time tying off by myself, and I went to sleep. Well, that's not true. I stayed up for hours making phone calls, letting people know everything was okay, and, saying my Merry Christmases and all that. But otherwise, I just pretty much lay in bed for most of an entire day. My right arm, before I went to bed, my right arm had pins and needles as if I had slept on it all night, but it was just the strain from holding on to that wheel for 30 hours. I'm not exaggerating about the 30 hours. I needed to eat something, so I made a little food, and the next day went and got myself some fish tacos. Go get yourself a steak. I don't give a shit about steak. Anyways, all's well that ends well, and I guess as airplane pilots say, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. Even though I've included things I could have done different along the way. I've been doing a lot of reading since then, and a lot of YouTubing, and I've talked to a few sailors that I know and that I've met, gotten a few tips. And if anybody on here has some tips they want to share, and you've owned a sailboat and single-handed it out in the Gulf, feel free to share it. And if Maria just brought me my dinner, Maria's my Spanish instructor. I'm taking a month-long immersive Spanish class here in La Ceiba, and it's just great. It was a great value. The Honduras Spanish school, it's included homestay, and I get fed just awesome food, and I just absolutely love it. If anybody listening ever wants to go spend a month trying to learn how to speak Spanish, I strongly recommend this, and just hit me up in the comments or a DM, and I'll give you the contact. The director of the school, Manuel, even listens to the podcast. Hi, Manuel, if you're listening. I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. La Ceiba is a fun, safe, gorgeous place. I'm sandwiched between the ocean and mountains. There's nowhere I'd rather be right now. Kinda. I do miss Capella. She's safe and sound in her slip in Fort Walton Beach. Part of me feels like I should head back there and work on her, but the weather in Florida is total rubbish right now. I'm already in Central America. I'll probably hang out here for a little while and then see where the road leads after that. It would be nice to get a little work done on her before returning to my summer job in late April, early May, but plans are fluid. I need a little break in space from the boat work to gather knowledge, to rest, and make sure that when I do return and actually do the work, that I do a good job. I don't really think I have that much to do. I just need to get the forestay and the new roller furling put in, check out the new sails that are being made. They're not even done, so if I was home, I couldn't do anything right now anyways, or not much. I'd like to create some better organization for the boat and come out with a better packing plan so I'm not carrying quite as much stuff. I had thought about building a hard dodger for Capella, but I really don't think that it's a good idea. It would create a lot of windage. If I did get hit broadside by a wave or pooped or knocked over, it would just tear the Dodger right off. And it was a hard Dodger. It could take me with it. It could do damage. It could really tear up the boat. So I'll have to give that some more thought. Maybe just a little companionway spray hood so I can sit in my favorite little seat, even if it's raining, stay dry and comfortable. They're all things I'm thinking about. I thoroughly dislike the way I have the solar array set up. I need to come up with a different way to set up my solar panels so I'm not restricting my bimini from being folded up. Nothing detrimental, nothing that I would have had to cut my trip short for, but definitely some minor changes I'd like to make. Otherwise, I really feel like she's still a wonderful seaworthy boat. The rest of the rigging is in decent shape. I'd like to replace the standing rigging, but I would like to do it in a foreign port. The prices for haul out and storage are a lot lower. Should I need help from a rigger or help painting the hull or any of those things, the labor is just considerably cheaper, and I don't see any reason why in her current condition, maybe with a modified sail plan, she couldn't make it south through Florida, through the Bahamas, across the Caymans, and over to here, to Honduras or to Guatemala. There's a couple of boat yards that have really good rates. I checked one out here. I actually met a couple of sailors and helped work on a boat over there last weekend. Just doing some basic seaworthiness stuff, helping sort out some electrical garbage, put in some new lighting, just chit-chat, and I wanted to be around boats. I wanted to hear the noise of grinders. It's hard to explain if you don't understand. In a nutshell, this hasn't been a waste. I am still accomplishing things that I felt were part of my list of things to do that had to do with sailing Capella. Although I miss my boat and I miss my roommate and I miss sailing, I'm having fun, and I'm still incredibly grateful and privileged for the life I've been able to lead. Cannot wait to see what happens next. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I'll check in a couple weeks.